6 months ago, my mother sold my $100 million inheritance and laughed while doing it. Today, she's sitting in my living room, broke, desperate, begging me for help. She thought I'd forgotten, but she doesn't know what I've built in the dark. You want to know how I got here? Let me take you back to the night everything changed. The night air felt heavy as I turned onto my parents' street in Buckhead. 6 months since I'd last stepped through those iron gates, and still the sight of that perfect colonial mansion made my stomach tighten. Every brick gleamed, every hedge trimmed within an inch of its life, the kind of perfection that hides everything ugly. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Flawless makeup, steady smile. My armor was in place. When I walked through the front door, the familiar scent of polish and my mother's perfume wrapped around me like a warning. "Celeste, you're here," she said without looking up from the dining table. No hug, no warmth, just a task. "Put the glasses out, will you?" The room glittered with silver and photographs. All of Preston. Preston at Harvard. Preston shaking hands with mayors and bankers. My one photo sat half hidden in a corner, as if I were a guest in their story. My father emerged from the kitchen, carving knife in hand, pretending not to see me. "Sunday brisket's almost ready," he said proudly. The same dry brisket no one ever admits is dry. Then, right on cue, the front door opened and Preston filled the hallway with his voice. Confident, loud, effortless. Mom's face lit up like Christmas morning. Dad's hand clapped his back. The golden sun had arrived. "Still playing shop?" he asked, sliding into a seat. Laughter followed, polite, sharp. "You should let Preston invest in your little brand," Mom added, as if I hadn't built it with my own hands. I smiled, said nothing, while Preston lifted his phone. A small red light blinked. Later that night, the video would appear online with the caption, "Family clown tries to talk business." Around that table, surrounded by perfect smiles and sharper knives, I understood something I'd never said out loud. That love in this house had always been conditional, and I had finally failed the conditions. That night, after everyone drifted off to their rooms, I wandered the hallway lined with portraits of men in suits and women who smiled like marble statues. The study door was half open, the same place where Grandpa used to read me stories and tell me, "One day, this family will be yours to guide." I stepped inside. The air still carried his cologne and the faint scent of old paper. A single lamp burned over the mahogany desk. On it lay a folder stamped Walker Holdings Trust, beneficiary transfer. My name was on the first page, but crossed out, replaced by one word, Preston. I remember the dizziness, the way my heartbeat filled the silence. Grandpa's will had promised me his shares, the foundation of the family fortune. But the signatures below told a different story. Documents restructured for tax reasons, all signed by my parents. My own signature, photocopied. I still hear my mother's voice from weeks earlier. "Just sign these, honey. The lawyer needs them to settle Grandpa's estate. We'll take care of the rest." They hadn't taken care of it. They'd taken it. I snapped a photo of the paperwork, hands trembling, and slipped the folder back exactly as I'd found it. As I turned to leave, a faint click made me freeze, the security camera light above the bookshelf. They had been watching. The next morning, my father confronted me over coffee, all fake calm. "You shouldn't snoop, Celeste. Money brings out the worst in people. We handled things for everyone's good." I asked, "You handled it or stole it?" He didn't answer. He just smiled, that patronizing smile I'd known since childhood, and said, "You wouldn't know what to do with that kind of money anyway." Hours later, I called Grandpa's lawyer, the only person who might confirm the truth. He hesitated, then whispered, "I can't discuss it on the phone, but you're right to ask." 2 days after that call, I saw the headline on my news feed, "Local attorney killed in car accident." My hands went cold. Whether it was coincidence or warning, I didn't wait to find out. That night I packed a suitcase, drove out of Buckhead, and promised myself one thing. If they wanted to bury my future, I'd build a new one so tall it would block out their sun. I started over with nothing but a laptop, a half-empty apartment, and the quiet kind of anger that never fades. By day, I worked a receptionist job. By night, I learned everything: manufacturing, marketing, shipping, taxes. The neighbors thought I was running a hobby. They never saw the boxes stacked to the ceiling or the bleeding cuts on my hands from taping them shut at 2 a.m. My first product line failed spectacularly. A supplier vanished with $50,000 of my savings. I sat on the cold floor surrounded by unsold inventory, whispering to myself, "They think you can't do this. Prove them wrong." That's when I met Reese Thornton, former consultant, burned out, too smart to stay safe. He looked at my chaos and said, "You don't have a mess. You have potential. Let me help you turn it into an empire." We named it the Perennial House because nothing about me was seasonal anymore. Year 1, losses. Year 2, barely surviving. Year 3, a design blogger posted one of our candles and everything exploded. Orders flooded in faster than I could breathe. Warehouses replaced garages. Employees replaced sleepless nights. While Reese negotiated contracts, I learned to disappear. No interviews, no photos, just results. Every time the numbers doubled, I felt that old wound ache a little less. By the 5th year, the Perennial House cleared $35 million in revenue. We had 47 employees, distributors in 4 countries, and no investors, just grit. Still, at family dinners, I kept my voice soft. They believed I was struggling, scraping by. I let them. Revenge isn't loud, it's patient. And I was building mine in silence. One night, as Reese and I closed another deal, he asked, "When do you tell them who you are?" I stared out the window at the city lights below. "When they finally stop laughing," I said. He smiled. "Then let's make sure they hear the silence first." I didn't start with millions. I started with silence. The night I left Buckhead, I drove until the city lights looked like fire in my rearview mirror. My parents thought they'd ended me. They didn't know they'd just created the most dangerous version of me, one with nothing left to lose. My new apartment was smaller than my old closet, but it was mine. No more rules, no more judgment. Just concrete floors, a second-hand desk, and a dream too stubborn to die. By day, I answered phones for people who never learned my name. By night, I built a business nobody believed could exist. I learned packaging, shipping, marketing, design, every failure, a free education. The first year, I lost everything I saved. A supplier disappeared with $50,000 and half my hope. For one long night, I sat on the cold floor surrounded by useless boxes and cried like a child. Then I stood up, wiped my face, and whispered to the empty room, "They think I'm small. Let's prove them wrong." The next morning I started again. I rebuilt every process, every contact, every ounce of trust. That's when Reese Thornton entered the picture. A corporate dropout with sharp eyes and a quiet voice that could slice through doubt. He looked at my chaos and saw strategy. "You don't have a mess," he said. "You have a prototype." Together we named the brand the Perennial House. Because perennials don't bloom once, they return, stronger, season after season. We worked out of my apartment for 18 months. No weekends, no parties, just the rhythm of ambition and exhaustion. Year 1, losses. Year 2, survival. Then came year 3. One late night, a design blogger posted our handmade candle on Instagram. By sunrise, 5,000 orders flooded the site. The servers crashed. I laughed until I cried again, but this time from relief. Suddenly, the Perennial House wasn't a secret. Magazines wanted interviews. Stores wanted shelves. And every order carried my initials hidden underneath the label, a quiet reminder of who they said could never succeed. Within 3 years, we grew from a spare bedroom to a full warehouse. 47 employees, 4 countries, $35 million in revenue. No loans. No investors. Just resilience turned into product. But to my family, I was still the one who played shop. I kept it that way. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is not showing your cards until the table is yours. Every check I signed, every shipment that left my dock, felt like reclaiming another piece of what they stole. Late one night, Reese found me staring out the office window. "When do you tell them?" he asked. I smiled, watching the skyline glitter below. When they finally stopped laughing, I said. He nodded. Then let's make sure the silence is loud enough to hear from Buckhead. We clinked coffee cups like champagne. And as the first light of morning hit the glass walls of our warehouse, I realized I'd already won. They just didn't know it yet. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of day my family reserved for appearances, not affection. Mom's dining room was set like a magazine spread, crystal glasses, heavy silver, laughter that sounded rehearsed. I hadn't planned to say anything that night, but Preston couldn't resist performing. There's a place on West Paces, he said between sips of wine. 5.2 million. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble. I'm thinking it's time for a real home. Mom beamed. You deserve it, sweetheart. A house that matches your success. Then she turned to me. And you, Celeste? Still playing with candles and throw pillows. I smiled. Actually, I've been house hunting too. The silence lasted 2 seconds, then the laughter hit like thunder. Preston wiped a tear from his eye. Good one, sis. Dad leaned forward, lowering his voice as if giving advice. Celeste, some people are made for business. Some aren't. And that's okay. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not from pain, but from perfect clarity. I realized I'd been playing chess with people who didn't even know I was on the board. When I left that night, I didn't cry. I drove straight to my office, where Reese was still working under the glow of the monitor. You're not going to believe this, I said, tossing my bag onto the desk. My brother's buying a $5 million house on West Paces. Reese looked up. The one near the golf club? That's the one. He leaned back, studying my face. You want it? I hesitated only a second. Yes. And I'm not waiting for approval. Within 24 hours, our lawyer called the realtor. The listing was still open. No contract signed. We made an all-cash offer through a shell company, clean, anonymous, impossible to trace. The seller accepted within hours. The same afternoon, Preston's banker called to say the property was gone. He was furious, convinced another investor had swooped in. I was that investor. The first time I stepped through those glass doors, the space echoed with possibility. Light poured in through windows that stretched to the skyline. It was everything he wanted, and now it was mine. You know what this place needs? Reese said, walking through the foyer. Your story. I nodded. Then let's tell it, quietly. Over the next month, designers transformed the house into a living gallery of the perennial house. Candles on marble counters. Handcrafted vases in the foyer. Throws embroidered with my initials. Every inch whispered who I had become. That's when the idea came. A housewarming party, I said one night, watching the lights of Atlanta flicker below. Reese raised an eyebrow. That's bold. Not bold, I corrected. Poetic. We sent out invitations, simple cream cards, no name on the sender. New West Paces resident, housewarming gala. Within days, my parents called. Celeste, Mom said, her tone bright. Did you get an invitation too? Must be one of Preston's new colleagues. You should come, might help you network. Of course, I told her. Wouldn't miss it. The hook was set. Weeks later, as movers finished the last touches, I stood at the top of the floating staircase, breathing in the scent of polished oak and victory. Preston thought he'd built the family legacy. What he didn't know was that I'd just bought the walls he was desperate to own. For the first time in my life, I wasn't seeking approval. I was building the stage where they'd finally see the truth. And soon, they would. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of day my family reserved for appearances, not affection. Mom's dining room was set like a magazine spread, crystal glasses, heavy silver, laughter that sounded rehearsed. I hadn't planned to say anything that night, but Preston couldn't resist performing. There's a place on West Paces, he said between sips of wine. 5.2 million. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble. I'm thinking it's time for a real home. Mom beamed. You deserve it, sweetheart. A house that matches your success. Then she turned to me. And you, Celeste? Still playing with candles and throw pillows? I smiled. Actually, I've been house hunting too. The silence lasted 2 seconds, then the laughter hit like thunder. Preston wiped a tear from his eye. Good one, sis. Dad leaned forward, lowering his voice as if giving advice. Celeste, some people are made for business. Some aren't. And that's okay. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not from pain, but from perfect clarity. I realized I'd been playing chess with people who didn't even know I was on the board. When I left that night, I didn't cry. I drove straight to my office, where Reese was still working under the glow of the monitor. You're not gonna believe this, I said, tossing my bag onto the desk. My brother's buying a $5 million house on West Paces. Reese looked up. The one near the golf club? That's the one. He leaned back, studying my face. You want it? I hesitated only a second. Yes. And I'm not waiting for approval. Within 24 hours, our lawyer called the realtor. The listing was still open. No contract signed. We made an all-cash offer through a shell company, clean, anonymous, impossible to trace. The seller accepted within hours. The same afternoon, Preston's banker called to say the property was gone. He was furious, convinced another investor had swooped in. I was that investor. The first time I stepped through those glass doors, the space echoed with possibility. Light poured in through windows that stretched to the skyline. It was everything he wanted, and now it was mine. You know what this place needs? Reese said, walking through the foyer. Your story. I nodded. Then let's tell it, quietly. Over the next month, designers transformed the house into a living gallery of the perennial house. Candles on marble counters. Handcrafted vases in the foyer. Throws embroidered with my initials. Every inch whispered who I had become. That's when the idea came. A housewarming party, I said one night, watching the lights of Atlanta flicker below. Reese raised an eyebrow. That's bold. Not bold, I corrected. Poetic. We sent out invitations, simple cream cards, no name on the sender. New West Paces resident, housewarming gala. Within days, my parents called. Celeste, Mom said, her tone bright. Did you get an invitation too? Must be one of Preston's new colleagues. You should come, might help you network. Of course, I told her. Wouldn't miss it. The hook was set. Weeks later, as movers finished the last touches, I stood at the top of the floating staircase, breathing in the scent of polished oak and victory. Preston thought he'd built the family legacy. What he didn't know was that I'd just bought the walls he was desperate to own. For the first time in my life, I wasn't seeking approval. I was building the stage where they'd finally see the truth. And soon they would. The night of the party felt like standing at the edge of two worlds, the one that broke me and the one I built from the pieces. The house glowed against the Atlanta skyline, every window spilling gold light onto the drive. Inside, strings hummed softly, glasses clinked, laughter floated through rooms that still smelled of fresh paint and power. Guests arrived in waves, executives, designers, local press, each greeted by servers in black carrying champagne on silver trays. None of them knew whose home they were stepping into. That was the point. From the balcony, I watched my own family pull up. Dad's familiar Mercedes. Mom in pearls, eyes already scanning for people worth impressing. Preston adjusting his tie like he was arriving at a board meeting. I stayed hidden in the crowd, close enough to hear. Whose place is this? Mom whispered. Has to be tech money, Preston replied, tracing the marble countertop. Old Atlanta can't afford tastes like this anymore. Dad laughed. Whoever owns it, they've got class. They moved from room to room, admiring every detail, the art, the furniture, the view. None of them noticed the small signature etched beneath the centerpiece vase. CW, Perennial House Collection. Looks just like those things Celeste sells, Mom said. Knockoffs, Preston scoffed. Real designers don't copy small brands. My pulse quickened. Reese caught my eye from across the room and lifted his glass. Our signal. He stepped forward, tapped it lightly with a spoon. The crystal chime sliced through conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, voice calm, sure, our host would like to say a few words. Heads turned upward. I stepped to the top of the floating staircase. The music faded, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat echoing through the open hall. "Welcome, everyone," I began, voice steady. "Some of you might recognize a few things tonight. Our candles, our fabrics, maybe even our story." I let the silence stretch. My family always said my work was a hobby, that I'd never build anything that mattered. So I thought I'd invite them to see what a hobby can buy. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Welcome to my home." For one suspended moment, nobody moved. Then I heard the sound of Preston's glass hit the marble. Mom's hand flew to her chest. Dad's face drained of color. Reese smiled faintly, proud. Guests began to applaud, softly at first, then louder, until the room shimmered with the sound of recognition. I descended the stairs slowly, every step erasing a decade of humiliation. 5.2 million, I said, meeting my brother's stunned eyes. Paid in full, in cash. From the company you once called a joke. Reporters whispered, phones lifted, flashes began. My mother tried to compose herself, voice trembling. "Celeste, stop joking. Whose house is this really?" "Mine," I answered simply, handing the deed folder to the nearest journalist. "Proof." The crowd surged with congratulations. People who had ignored me for years wanted interviews, handshakes, partnerships. Across the room, Preston's smile collapsed. He turned, stormed toward the door, leaving behind the reputation he'd spent a lifetime polishing. My parents followed, silent, unable to speak beneath the weight of what they'd just witnessed. When the door closed behind them, Reese lifted his glass once more. "To the quiet ones," he said. I clinked mine against his, a single tear catching the light. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting for a seat at their table. I had built my own, and tonight, the world finally saw it. The front doors swung open on the same marble I once scrubbed clean for their visits. They entered hesitantly, as if the house itself might judge them. The difference was impossible to ignore. My father's proud posture gone, my mother's pearls trembling against her throat, Preston lagging behind like a shadow. I stayed where I was at the top of the floating staircase. The higher ground.
"Come in," I said.
My voice carried, calm and hollow. No hugs, no greetings, just the echo of footsteps in a house they could never own. They gathered on the sofa while I remained standing. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence did the talking for me. Dad cleared his throat. "Celeste, we need your help." I folded my arms. "With what?" His hands shook. Preston's firm collapsed. "The bank froze our accounts. We lost the house, everything." Mom leaned forward, tears streaking her mascara. "Just until we get back on our feet. You have so much now. Please, sweetheart." I looked at Preston. The man who once called me a failure couldn't even lift his eyes. "You knew what you were doing," I said quietly. "You took what was mine and gambled it." He muttered, "It was business. No one expected the market to crash." "No," I corrected. "It wasn't the market. It was arrogance." I walked past them to the window, where sunlight poured across the floor like a spotlight. "Do you remember the inheritance Grandpa left me? The one you said I didn't deserve?" Dad's jaw tightened. "That's not." "Yes, it is." I turned back to them. "You sold my future and handed it to him. And now you've come to me because he lost yours too." Mom reached for my hand. "Celeste, we're family." I stepped back. Family protects each other. You protected your pride. The air hung heavy, the kind of silence that ends chapters. Then I opened the door, letting the afternoon light flood the room. "You taught me something valuable," I said softly. "That money reveals character." I met my mother's tearful gaze, the same eyes that once looked through me. "So go ask your favorite child." The words landed like a verdict. My father tried to speak, but the sound died in his throat. Preston finally looked up, his face a portrait of defeat. "Goodbye," I whispered, and I closed the door. On the other side, muffled pleas faded down the marble steps. Inside, the house fell silent again, peaceful, not empty. I poured myself a glass of water, The same simple act my mother once used to dismiss me, and watched the sunlight dance across the surface. Revenge hadn't been loud or cruel. It had been patient,
Precise. Complete.
Weeks passed, and the silence became its own reward. No more late-night calls. No more messages dripping with guilt or excuses. Just peace. Each morning, sunlight poured through the same windows Preston once bragged about owning. It touched everything they said I'd never have. Not the luxury, but the freedom. Reese and I spent our days building, not proving. He'd joke about future projects while I review designs for the spring line. The perennial house was thriving, new contracts, new faces, new beginnings. One afternoon, my phone lit up again.
Mom.
The screen glowed for a moment, then dimmed when I didn't move. There was a time I would have answered immediately, desperate for approval, craving the sound of her voice saying she was proud. But not anymore. I let it ring until silence returned, then turned the phone face down on the marble counter. "Everything okay?" Reese asked from across the room. "Perfect," I said, smiling softly. We reviewed swatches for the new collection: soft cream, muted gold, colors of calm, not war. For the first time, I felt what success was supposed to feel like: quiet, warm, earned. I walked to the window, watching the city move below. My reflection looked back, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, free of the weight I used to carry. They sold my inheritance for greed. I rebuilt it with purpose. And when the world demanded a final line to the story, I finally found it. Revenge fades. Freedom lasts forever. Fade out.